I never thought I would be writing something like this, and honestly, even now, I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. I'm 24 years old, and my boyfriend is 27. We've been together for a little over a year. Up until recently, I would have said things were good. Not perfect, but good, comfortable, safe. The kind of relationship where you settle into routines and start imagining a future, without really questioning it. We have differences, of course, every couple does. But nothing that ever felt like a deal breaker. Except one thing, sex. From the very beginning, I was clear with him. On our third date, before things got serious, I told him that I don't believe in having penetrative sex before marriage. That wasn't something I hid or slowly revealed later. I said it up front so he could decide whether that was something he was okay with. I'm not here to debate whether that belief is right or wrong. I don't want advice about changing my values. This isn't about religion versus atheism or sexual liberation or purity culture. It's about respect. He knew this about me from the start. And for the most part, he acted like he respected it. I'm sexually inexperienced. I don't watch porn. I don't really know much about sex beyond what's common knowledge. He's the opposite. He's had multiple partners, he's confident, and he's always positioned himself as patient and understanding with me. He would tease sometimes, sure, but it was usually lighthearted. He'd make jokes, but never in a way that felt cruel. Or at least, that's what I thought. This past week, everything changed. It started when he suggested we go shopping together. He was vague about it at first, just saying he wanted to spice things up and that it would be fun. I didn't immediately realize what he meant, but eventually he admitted he wanted to go to an adult store. I was hesitant. I told him I wasn't sure I was comfortable with that. He reassured me, said we wouldn't do anything extreme, that we'd just look around, that it was normal and nothing to be embarrassed about. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When we walked into the store, I felt out of place immediately. The lights were harsh. The walls were covered with things I had never seen in real life before. I felt exposed just standing there. At first, a worker came over to help us. She seemed friendly enough, asked if we were looking for anything specific. I thought maybe she'd help us find something mild, something reasonable. That's not what happened. My boyfriend suddenly started acting different. He began pulling items off the shelves, things that looked extreme, even intimidating. Toys that were clearly not beginner-friendly. Outfits that made my stomach knot just looking at them. He started making comments, laughing, pointing things out like it was some kind of game. Then it got worse. He pulled up videos on a screen in the store. Graphic ones. Things I had never seen and never asked to see. I felt my face burning. My heart started pounding. I didn't know where to look. The worker started laughing with him. She chimed in. Made jokes, encouraged him. I felt like I was shrinking. I tried to brush it off at first. Told myself I was being too sensitive. That this was just awkwardness and culture shock, but as it kept going, something inside me snapped. I asked him, quietly at first, why he was doing this. Why he was pushing so hard. Why this suddenly felt like a performance instead of a shared experience. That's when he told me the truth. The worker wasn't just a random employee. She was his friend. They had planned this. Together, they had decided it would be funny to tease me, to shock me, to see my reaction, to push me out of my comfort zone without my consent. I don't remember everything I said after that. I remember my chest tightening, my vision blurring. The realization that this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was intentional. I started crying. Right there in the store. I felt humiliated in a way I've never felt before. Like my most personal boundaries had been turned into a joke for someone else's entertainment. I didn't want to make a scene, but I couldn't stop it. I was overwhelmed, embarrassed, and angry all at once. He drove us there, but I couldn't bring myself to sit in the car with him. I took the bus home instead. The ride felt endless. When I got home, I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt stupid, dramatic, weak, like maybe I should have just laughed it off and gone along with it. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, I barely spoke to him. I needed space to process what had happened. Eventually, though, I decided we had to talk about it. I told him how humiliated I felt. I told him how betrayed I felt. I told him that it wasn't funny to me, that it crossed a line, that involving another person made it worse, that I felt exposed and mocked. He listened. And then he told me he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He said it was just a joke, that I was taking it too seriously, that I needed to loosen up. I told him I didn't need a grand gesture. I didn't need him to grovel. I just needed him to acknowledge that he hurt me. He refused. The next day, he came to me again, not to apologize, but to tell me that his friends agreed with him. That they thought I was being overly sensitive. That's when I felt embarrassed all over again. Because that meant he had told them. He told his friends about taking me to a sex shop. About my discomfort, about my reaction. About something deeply personal that I never agreed to share. I felt exposed in a way I can't fully explain. I didn't know what to do anymore. I love him, or at least I thought I did. And I don't want to be the kind of girlfriend who ruins jokes or makes everything uncool. I don't want to be labeled dramatic or prudish or controlling. But I also can't ignore the pit in my stomach telling me this wasn't okay. This was the first big fight we'd ever had, and instead of trying to understand me, he doubled down. Instead of protecting me, he laughed. And for the first time since we started dating, I found myself wondering if I'd made a mistake. After that conversation, nothing felt the same. We were in the same apartment, sleeping in the same bed, moving through the same routines, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the store, the laughter, the way he'd looked at me like I was part of the joke instead of his partner. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was being dramatic. That maybe this really was just a badly executed joke that spiraled out of control, that people mess up sometimes. But what bothered me wasn't just what he did. It was how little he seemed to care about how it affected me. For a couple of days, I didn't bring it up again. I needed time to calm down. I wanted to approach the conversation rationally, not emotionally. I didn't want to scream or cry. I wanted to explain myself clearly, so there was no misunderstanding. Finally, I asked him if we could talk. We sat down in the living room. I remember feeling nervous, like I was about to give a presentation instead of talking to someone who supposedly loved me. My heart was pounding, but I told myself this was important. I told him I wanted him to understand why what happened hurt me so deeply. I explained how exposed I felt in that store. How embarrassed I was that he had planned it with someone else. How violated I felt knowing that my discomfort was part of the joke. I told him it wasn't just about sex, it was about trust. I talked for a long time, probably 20 minutes straight. I told him how confusing it was because I'd never seen this side of him before. How it scared me that someone I trusted could so easily turn my vulnerability into entertainment. I told him I felt humiliated, not enlightened, small, not empowered. I kept waiting for him to interrupt me with an apology. He didn't. When I finally stopped talking, he sighed and leaned back like he was exhausted. And then he changed the subject entirely. He started talking about religion. He reminded me that he was an atheist. Something I already knew. Something that had never been a problem before. He said that my beliefs were the real issue here, not his actions. He told me I should actually be grateful. He said he was doing me a favor by exposing me to sexual imagery, that my upbringing had sheltered me too much. That religion was bad for women because it made them submissive, ashamed, and sexually repressed. I just sat there, stunned. I hadn't brought up religion once. This wasn't a debate about faith. This wasn't about theology or morality. This was about the fact that he humiliated me in public and refused to acknowledge it. I told him I didn't want to have a religious argument. That this had nothing to do with Christianity. That my choice to wait wasn't something I was forced into. It was something I chose for myself. He brushed that off. He said that whether I realized it or not, my beliefs were holding me back. That he was trying to help me grow. That I was being defensive because I didn't want to confront my own repression. Every word felt like another slap. I realized then that he wasn't listening to me at all. He wasn't trying to understand how I felt. He was trying to win. To him, this wasn't about my pain. It was about proving he was right. I asked him again, calmly, if he could just acknowledge that what he did hurt me. He refused. He said that if I hadn't been so uptight, none of this would have been a problem. That if I could learn to take a joke, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. At some point, he said something that made my stomach drop. He told me that maybe this whole situation was my fault because my stupid religion was keeping me from experiencing sex properly. That maybe if I weren't so afraid of intimacy, he wouldn't have had to push me. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about helping me. This was about shaming me. About making me feel small enough, embarrassed enough, insecure enough that I'd question my boundaries. That I'd wonder if I really was the problem. That maybe I'd feel so ashamed of my inexperience that I'd give in just to stop feeling like the odd one out. The more he talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-off mistake. This was who he was when he didn't get his way. I felt something inside me go quiet, not angry, not hysterical, just done. I told him that if he couldn't respect me, my beliefs, my boundaries, my feelings, then I couldn't be with him anymore. I told him that love doesn't look like humiliation. That respect doesn't involve turning someone's vulnerability into a joke. That caring about someone means apologizing when you hurt them, even if you didn't mean to. He laughed. Actually laughed. And then he lost his temper. He started yelling, accusing me of throwing away our relationship over nothing, telling me I was overreacting, that I was brainwashed, that I'd regret this when I realized how much I was missing out on. He told me this was all my fault, that my beliefs were ruining everything, that I was choosing imaginary rules over real intimacy. In that moment, I wasn't confused anymore. I broke up with him right there. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just told him it was over. That seemed to shock him more than anything else. He flew off the handle, shouting, pacing, saying things he could never take back, telling me I'd never find someone who would put up with my issues, that I was wasting my youth, that I was afraid of my own body. But I didn't feel ashamed anymore. I felt relieved. We had just started renting an apartment together a few months earlier. The timing couldn't have been worse. I told him I'd keep paying my half of the rent, but I'd be moving back in with my parents until the lease ended. Even after everything, I still felt embarrassed. Not because of my beliefs, but because I had trusted someone who saw my boundaries as something to be conquered instead of respected. Looking back now, I realized something important. That store wasn't the problem. It was just the place where the mask finally slipped. After the breakup, the apartment felt unbearable. Every room was full of echoes, conversations we'd had, routines we'd built, plans that no longer existed. Even the quiet felt hostile. I packed a bag that night and went to my parents' house, telling myself it was temporary, that I just needed space to think. But the more distance I got, the clearer everything became. For the first few days, I felt raw and exposed. Not heartbroken in the way people describe missing someone, but shaken. Like I had narrowly avoided something worse and was still catching my breath. I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, wondering how I hadn't seen it sooner. We had been together for over a year. A year of what I thought was patience, kindness, and understanding. And yet, when it mattered most, when I expressed discomfort and pain, his response wasn't empathy, it was defensiveness, mockery, contempt. That realization hurt more than the breakup itself. He tried to contact me multiple times after I left. Long messages, angry messages. Messages that swung wildly between guilt-tripping and self-pity. At one point, he accused me of ruining his reputation by making him look like the bad guy just by leaving. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say, I had too many. But because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Continuing the conversation would only give him another chance to rewrite what happened. And I wasn't going to let him do that. My parents didn't push me for details, but when I told them what had happened, they were quietly supportive. No lectures. No, I told you so. Just reassurance that I had done the right thing by trusting my instincts. That meant more to me than they probably realized. As the days passed, the embarrassment I'd been carrying began to shift. It didn't disappear, but it changed shape. Instead of feeling ashamed of myself, I started feeling angry on my own behalf. Not explosive anger, something steadier. I realized how carefully I had communicated my boundaries from the very beginning, how clear I had been about my values, how much effort I had put into meeting him halfway without betraying myself, and how little that had mattered to him once he decided his amusement was more important. What really haunted me wasn't the prank itself. It was the way he doubled down, the way he brought his friends into it, the way he turned my pain into a debate to be won, the way he framed humiliation as help. That's when it hit me. If I had stayed, this wouldn't have been the last time something like this happened. It would have just escalated. A few days later, I finally returned to the apartment to grab the rest of my things. He wasn't there, something I was grateful for. I moved quickly, packing clothes, books, small personal items. The space already felt different, like it belonged to someone else. And maybe it always had. I noticed things I hadn't before. Little comments he'd made over the months. Jokes that had landed oddly. Moments where I'd felt small but brushed it off because I didn't want to be difficult. At the time, they'd seemed insignificant. Now, they formed a pattern. I left my keys on the counter and walked out without looking back. The lease would end in September. I would pay my half. I would keep things clean and civil from a distance. But emotionally, I was already gone. What surprised me most was how quickly the relief set in. I slept better. I breathed easier. I didn't feel like I was constantly bracing myself for another joke at my expense. The tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders without realizing it slowly faded. For the first time in a long while, I felt grounded in myself again. I thought a lot about boundaries after that. About how easy it is to confuse tolerance with kindness. How often women are taught to soften their discomfort so others don't feel awkward. How quickly concern for someone else's feelings can turn into self-betrayal. I realized how dangerous it is when someone frames your boundaries as something to fix. Especially when they claim to be doing it for your own good. I didn't leave because we disagreed about sex. I left because he refused to respect me. Because he laughed when I cried. Because he told me my pain was invalid unless his friends agreed with it. Because he tried to shame me into changing instead of loving me as I was. That distinction matters. People kept asking me if I regretted not having sex with him, if I felt like I'd missed out. If I wondered whether things would have been different if I'd just given in. The answer is no. If anything, I'm grateful. Grateful that I never crossed that line with someone who saw my body as a problem to solve, instead of a boundary to honor. Grateful that the mask slipped before things became even more complicated. Grateful that I trusted myself enough to walk away. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It did, but pain isn't always a sign that you made the wrong choice. Sometimes it's the cost of making the right one. Looking back now, the adult store incident wasn't random or out of character. It was a test. Not one he intended to admit to, but a test nonetheless. Would I laugh it off? Would I doubt myself? Would I let embarrassment override my instincts? When I didn't, he got angry. And that told me everything I needed to know. I don't hate him. I don't even think he's irredeemable. But I know, without a doubt, that he was not someone I could build a life with. Not someone who could walk beside me as an equal. Not someone who would protect me when it mattered. And once you see that clearly, there's no unseeing it. I still believe in relationships. I still believe in intimacy, trust, and compromise. But I also believe now, more firmly than ever, that respect is non-negotiable. And anyone who treats your boundaries like a joke doesn't deserve access to your life. I walked away embarrassed. I stayed away empowered. And that's a trade I'd make again without hesitation.